A king who rotted from within. I don't know about you, but there's something immensely intriguing about watching someone completely lose their shit. And this medieval king is a perfect example of that. His diagnosis at the age of 13 was basically a social death sentence. Even more so when his own tutor discovered that he could not feel pain, dropping him off for dead. But then the kid just didn't die, and as a result, he would go on to become one of the most ferocious warriors of his time. He would also, however, completely rot from within, both figuratively and literally. So exactly what happened to this kid who shouldn't have lived? Well, let's find out in today's episode of... The year was 1183 when 13-year-old Baldwin IV ascended to the throne of Jerusalem. He was the son of King Amalric I and Queen Melissa. After his father died, his mother became regent until Baldwin was old enough to rule. But this kid was going to need some serious help because he had leprosy. To put things into perspective, during the Middle Ages, if someone so much as laid a finger on a person suffering from leprosy, they were immediately banished from society. That's how deadly it was. It was often referred to as the disease of the damned, and for good reason, too. When his mother noticed signs of the disease on her son, she called upon William of Tyre, who was a physician and the tutor of the young prince, to treat him. When William examined the boy, he found that he had lesions on his face and extremities, alongside a loss of sensation. William tried everything he could, but he soon realized that the boy was going to die. In fact, he even wrote a rather macabre passage detailing his beliefs on the matter. The physicians did their best, but they were quite unable to conceal the truth from the royal mother, namely that the king's illness was incurable and that he would die. However, instead of dying, Baldwin would live for another 42 years. William of Tyre has a very interesting story regarding how he came to terms with the reality of the boy's future. One day he went to visit Baldwin and sat on the edge of the boy's bed. He thought he would test his pupil to see if he was feeling anything. So he picked up a sharp needle and pricked the boy's finger. Now, if Baldwin reacted or flinched at all, then William knew that he still had a chance. But he didn't. He didn't react at all. This led William to believe that the boy was truly beyond saving. And so he dropped the needle and left the room, believing the boy to be dead. But here's where the story takes a turn. As William walked away, supposedly he heard the sound of a needle being moved across fabric. When he returned, he asked Baldwin if he felt anything. The boy replied, "No." At this point, William realized that this kid wasn't going to die. And this is likely when he decided to keep secret what he had done. Either way, young Baldwin was sent to a monastery while his mother continued to rule. But after Baldwin's mother died in 1169, he became king at the age of 20. So now we have a leper king. Talk about a curse, for those of you who are wondering. Leprosy is a chronic infectious disease caused by a bacterium called Mycobacterium leprae. It typically attacks the skin, peripheral nerves, upper respiratory tract, and eyes. It spreads through armadillos and wild rodents. But the worst part about it is that its symptoms can lie dormant for decades before they manifest. And once they do, it's too late. Leprosy was also known to cause paralysis, disfigurement, blindness, ulcers, and loss of sensation. So given that this guy was literally rotting from the inside out, how was he able to become a warrior and beat Saladin? Well, here's the thing. Initially, leprosy can cause muscle weakness and joint pains. So it's possible that early on in his life as a warrior, he was able to keep up with the rest of them. But the thing is, leprosy does not discriminate. As time passed by, the disease continued to weaken him, and eventually he was left without the use of his limbs. This must have been a terrible time for him, because leprosy can cause insane amounts of pain. In fact, when he was around 26 years old, a severe coughing fit threw him violently to the ground and broke his shoulder blade. But instead of dying, as everyone expected, he pulled through. Perhaps this was when his medical team was able to intervene and set his bone. But whatever happened, this wasn't the end of it. As he got older, his shoulder began to dislocate on a regular basis. Eventually, the pain became unbearable and his entire shoulder had to be reset. Now, I'm not a doctor, nor am I pretending to be one, but I've seen my fair share of broken bones. And trust me when I say that breaking a bone is absolutely excruciating. Imagine having that kind of pain every single day for months on end. It's sheer hell, and somehow this man managed to live through it. Okay, so at this point, I think it's safe to say that this man experienced all of the worst symptoms leprosy had to offer, because despite his condition, he decided to marry a woman named Isabella of the House of Montferrat. Now, you may be asking yourself, how on earth was he able to consummate the marriage if he couldn't feel a thing? Well, I'm glad you asked. Court records tell us that in order to assist the king during intimate moments, a young lady named Hosira was hired for the job. She was tasked with helping the king undress and bathe, and she even slept in his bed with him. But unfortunately for her, leprosy doesn't care whether you're male or female, and she wound up contracting the disease from him, although hers was a much milder case than his. Another unfortunate side effect of leprosy is that it can cause growths on the body, particularly the nose and face. This is often referred to as the leonine facies. Now, there's no real cure for this, aside from surgery, but for Baldwin, the issue was a bit more complex. As his leprosy progressed, his face became so disfigured that his jaw became completely detached from his skull. This isn't a sight most people want to see, and as a result, he was forced to wear a metal mask to cover his face. Now, imagine trying to woo your wife under these circumstances. It would be awkward, to say the least. On top of that, leprosy also has the ability to break down the protective layers of the eye, leading to blindness. So yeah, our poor king was going blind as well. And finally, as the disease ravaged his body, it left him unable to walk. So how exactly did he manage to win against Saladin at the Battle of Mont Gizzard? Well, he didn't actually participate in the battle himself. He watched the proceedings from a tower nearby, offering tactical advice to his general. His general, a man named Sybrand of the House of Laval, acted as Baldwin's surrogate on the battlefield. Here's the thing, though. While leprosy is considered a relatively slow-moving disease, there were instances when its symptoms would move quicker than normal, causing the sick individual to quickly become paralyzed. This was likely the case with Baldwin, because by 1187 he was unable to leave his bed. Let's also not forget that throughout all of this, Baldwin was also dealing with the stress of being a medieval king. There were rebellions to put down, alliances to forge, and wars to wage. He also had to deal with the fact that he could not bear children, which was a huge problem for him and his kingdom. See, if he couldn't produce an heir, then the kingdom of Jerusalem would cease to exist. Because according to medieval succession laws, the throne could only be passed down to close male relatives. Baldwin had 3 sisters, but no brothers. So that meant that when he died, his sisters' sons would be the ones to inherit the throne. Problem was, they were all members of rival noble houses, and this would cause nothing but civil war. It seems as though he was aware of this, because towards the end of his life, he grew distant from his people, spending most of his time alone in his chambers. No longer did he care about the state of his kingdom. All he wanted to do was stay in his bed and wait for it to end. And when I say wait, I mean for a full 5 years. During this time, he was completely immobile, unable to speak. He had to have his food ground into a liquid and then spoon-fed it to him. And he required multiple attendants to assist him in relieving himself on the privy. He was eventually carried out onto a litter, which is essentially a type of ancient stretcher, so that he could be taken to his final military reviews. But after that, he was carried back to his chamber, where he remained until his death on March 16th, 1185. It was said that he was visited by a mysterious black-robed man who washed the king's wounds and cured him of his leprosy. And while it's unclear who this man was, it's possible that he was simply experiencing a hallucination brought on by his disease. Either way, he died at the age of 62, leaving behind a legacy of courage and tragedy. He was the kid who should have died, but didn't. He became a warrior despite his limitations, and he fought until his body gave out. I think that's why he's become somewhat of a folk hero in medieval literature. He really was a tragic hero. Oh, and he was also depicted by Orlando Bloom in the movie Kingdom of Heaven. If you like this video, make sure to check out the series in the description below. Thanks for watching.